start with, we have Matthew Heberger from the Pacific Institute. Matthew is also the co-author of the Sea Level Rise report for California, and he is going to talk us through some of the issues and impacts of climate change and address the issue specifically about sea level rise. Matthew?
Thank you, Fatima. The Pacific Institute, we are a nonprofit environmental policy organization. We're based in Oakland, just south of here, and we've been working on the impacts of climate change on water resources for the last 22 years. It's one of the things we're sort of most well known for. And I'm an environmental engineer, a hydrologist by training, and got involved with this study a couple of years ago. And the way it worked is in 1990, we did one of the first economic assessments of what climate change was going to mean for San Francisco Bay Area and for California in general. The study was starting to get a little dated, and so Mr. Travis from Bay Conservation and Development Commission said, why don't you guys redo this study? And so we did. And I think to put it in context, this is, well, I'll show you in a bit. A lot of the California coast, we've got 2,000 miles of coast, about 1,000 miles inside the San Francisco Bay, another 1,000 miles on the Pacific coast. And just what we're looking at, what are some of the things that are potentially in harm's way as tides begin rising, as they already have? You've got lots of development right on the beach in Southern California. This is Laguna Beach area. You can see these people are just at an elevation a few feet above the high tide there. Right here in San Francisco, on the coast, you've got really dense development, and these sort of low-lying concrete bulkheads there are a seawall, which are designed to deflect some of the wave energy and prevent some flood damages there. Also, we have this marvelous road, if you haven't had a chance to drive Route 1, that goes up the entire coast of California. Unfortunately, it's built in a pretty precarious spot, and there have been erosion damages to a lot of the sections of this already. You can see a lot of the coastline is actually, it's quite soft. It's crumbly. And so as the tides begin rising and you have waves hitting higher up against these dunes and against the bluffs, you're having increased erosion. And this has already been a problem, and this is something the State Transportation Agency is very worried about. And so they were one of our 3 funders for this study, which was the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, which is part of Caltrans. They're the state transportation agency, as well as the Energy Commission and the Ocean Protection Council that funded us. Also, we had a bunch of airports around the state. LAX down in Los Angeles turns out is up on a fairly high plateau. Our results showed that they don't have to worry too much for a while. But right here in the Bay Area, SFO, San Francisco, Oakland, San Francisco Airport and Oakland Airport are quite low-lying. They're built on fill. They're surrounded by these sort of low levees, and they're not going to be high enough in coming years to really protect them. So how many of you have seen this graph before? Just a couple of you. So this is lifted straight from the most recent IPCC assessment report on what the impacts of climate change are going to be around the world. And I think this is a really, really important graph, which is why I want to spend a minute on it. So right now we've got CO2 going into the atmosphere, causing warming, and so that's that first graph. We expect as governments around the world, as we run out of fossil fuels, and as governments take steps to reduce the amount of CO2 we're putting into the atmosphere, that's eventually going to level off. But the amount of CO2 is going to stay in the atmosphere for a very, very long time. For hundreds of years, for 100 to 300 years. Temperature is going to continue going up for a long time after that, up to 1,000 years, you can see on here. And sea level rise. The ocean is this massive thermal mass, and it has a lot of inertia associated with it. So the oceanographers and climate scientists tell us to expect this is going to go up for thousands of years. So our, not just grandchildren, but great-great-grandchildren are going to be living with our consumption and our use of fossil fuels and resources for a long time to come. And so that's why I say adaptation is a necessary thing. So in the climate world, we talk about mitigation, which is reducing CO2 emissions. And then we talk about adaptation, which are the things that we know that we have to do to make ourselves more resilient and deal with some of the impacts of climate change. And I guess to put it in a little bit more context, California, as some of you already know, our Governor Schwarzenegger signed an executive order in 2005. Shortly thereafter, the legislature passed a bill saying we're going to reduce our CO2 emissions. And so we're beginning to sort of figure out what that means to our economy and to our lifestyle. But aside from that, he also asked the state to take a look at what climate change was going to mean to California. And so a bunch of different organizations and scientists around the state were doing different studies to figure out what it was going to mean. And so our study was just one of a suite of studies, of over 30 different ones, which were done, just finished this year. And looking at all sorts of different impacts, from wildfires to water supply availability, public health, all sorts of different impacts, the Climate Action Team assessment, which are all on the web now. So this was just one of them. So we decided to look really at flooding. And if you look at what's happened to sea level rise, we're lucky in San Francisco. We have a tide gauge down at the Presidio, right by the Golden Gate. And they've been measuring tides since 1854. And if you look at the trace of tides, they go up and down a lot every day, 2 meters every day. But over time, over the last 100 years, they've gone up by 8 inches. It doesn't sound like much. It's about 2 millimeters per year. So you think, well, if I'm on the coast, I can just kind of get out of the way really slowly. It doesn't take much to move 2 millimeters per year. But it's not really just these mean tides and high tides that are going to be impacting us. We think it's going to be an increase in flooding, which is really going to be the way we're going to experience sea level rise, is these rare events. So you hear about the 100-year flood in the US. This is what we've decided collectively as a society to do a lot of our planning and a lot of our insurance and all based around this 100-year flood. So that means it's had a 1% chance of occurring in any given year. So in theory, if you're building somewhere along the coast, you should be above this 100-year flood elevation, which is a lot higher than mean sea level or high tide. But as sea level rises, the entire tide regime is going to be going up along with the flood elevation along with that. So we looked at a scenario. I think as we were doing this study, we realized it was very important to get good science and have all the people who are going to be using our results to really buy into the study. And so we worked really closely with some of the different regulatory agencies, as well as some scientists, very well-known institution, the Scripps Institution of Oceanography down at the University of California at San Diego, with scientists from the US Geological Survey, to bring some of this data together. And what we looked at were really, so all these different things, these aren't certainties. We don't know exactly where these lines are going to be. And for a long time, people have said, oh, there's so much uncertainty. How can we possibly plan? Well, it's irresponsible not to plan for anything. And so these are all just various different scenarios, different storylines, we call them. So sea level rise, it may be 10 centimeters, it may be 3 meters. But what are the likelihoods of some of those? So we ended up using a sort of medium-high scenario. In climate speak, it's the A2 scenario. And this was from conversations with a lot of the different climate scientists who believe that this is one of the things that could happen. And so that came out to 1.4 meters by the year 2100 of sea level rise. That's 55 inches. That's pretty dramatic, and it caused a lot of people to really stand up and pay attention. So you see this entire flood regime going up by a certain amount, and that puts a lot of existing development at risk. And along the coast, we're accustomed to living with risk. A lot of people, we already have floods that take place around the state all the time, but this amount of risk is going to be higher in the future, we think. And our current infrastructure, levees, seawalls, etc., aren't going to be able to withstand the flood risk that we're going to be seeing in coming years. And so we're looking at massive infrastructure spending to raise, strengthen, fortify some of these existing flood defenses. Here's an example down, I think this is in Hayward, which is a little bit south of here, just really typical for what you see around San Francisco Bay, these sort of low rock walls are called riprap, or these levees, and then a lot of development right behind that.